In the last video, we hit a milestone where we have the information coming back from our API calls. If you don't recall what it looked like, current state of the app looks like this. Basically, anytime the app starts, we get the current weather based on this latitude and longitude that we have here. One of the things that we might get to this video, if not this one next, is we can't just arbitrarily just have a latitude and longitude here. We're gonna connect the GPS from our phones into the app so we can get the current weather of where you are. Also, we might add an ability to like enter in a city name in that way. So right now what's happening is every time the app starts, it just makes a request one time, and we have no like control over how often it happens or anything like that. This view did load is called every time your app is finished loading. There's a few different versions of things like this. There's view did appear, disappear, view will appear. View did load is pretty standard. This is a job for most things you need, but this is not ideally where you'd want to put it. Another thing is, if you noticed, if you're paying attention, is that we're storing these values of the time, summary, temperature, humidity, and then we're just using them to populate our text labels. We could just do it directly. We're not actually using these values again afterwards. So a few things like that. But what I want to do right now, just to end off this video, is we're going to make another Swift file. It's going to be a weather class. So rather than doing this whenever the app loads, we're gonna have a class that does that. It both gets the information that we need about the weather and also stores it. So just right click or two-touch click if you're on a laptop. Click on Swift file. I'm gonna call this weather.swift. You don't have to actually put the .swift in. Call this weather. It's gonna populate. Okay, and then I'm gonna do class weather. That's just how you start off. That's just how you start off Swift files. In this case, it's specifying that it's the type of a view controller. View controllers are the containing views that you see in storyboards. These are view controllers. You can see it written up here. This is a screen. It's literally, if you think about what it's called, it's a view controller. It's a controller for a single view. This weather is not a view controller. It's a special class that we're going to make. And what I'm going to do now is just actually grab these values. Command X to cut it out. Not that. Pop them in here. And then I'm going to make our first function, which is going to be get current weather. And for that, for now, we'll leave it with no parameters. So what this is it's like a function. It's called a function. Some languages call it a method. It holds a block of functionality, and we're gonna actually put in the code that makes a request and gets the weather information into that block. So I'm just gonna cut all of this out and paste it in here. I'm gonna save this. This is gonna complain right now because it doesn't know what Alamo Fire is. So remember to import it here. Cool, it actually auto-completed. Last time it was giving us problems. Let's cut that out for now. These labels have to stay here. They belong to this view and they're literally connected. You can see with these filled in dots to the view. So they're gonna stay there. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a weather object, which we're gonna say let weather, I'm blanking out, let weather So it's complaining that I called weather a let constant. I think we've been using variables up to this point. Lets, when you type in let whatever, let pi equals 3.14, it's a value that you can't change later. Variables can change. Things that are constant, not going to change, like pi, you would just you would define as constant. Something like weather is not something that we want to be constant. So I define it like this. We don't have to. Let's just do it at the start. We're going to create weather, and then basically what we're going to be able to do is we're going to do weather dot and then get current weather. We'll do the same thing that we did before. So now all we have in this view is this tiny little bit, and the functionality of it is inside this class here, which comes out to be a lot cleaner. I'm going to stop printing out this information. I don't feel like we need it anymore. And then now we're getting complaints that these values that belong to the view controller aren't defined here. So let's actually just delete them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a initializer. Initializer is when here in the view controller I say weather equals weathers with open and close parentheses, it's supposed to create this weather class that we just made. And here's where you would give it default values. You technically don't have to. I'm actually gonna, never mind, I'm not gonna do that. You technically don't have to. It's more for a case of like, if you're gonna have like a class called employees or something, and each time you create a new employee, you would have like badge number, badge ID, and then like name and stuff like that. So you can initialize the class with like default values, but since we're never gonna need to do that, and all our values are defined, we can actually just not have initializer. If I deleted the value of humidity, we should get a complaint that says, there you go, class weather has no initializers. If you ever get this complaint, it's because if you don't initialize it, when I say weather equals weather, open and close parentheses, it's literally saying like, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you want me to do. What is this value? Is it a string? Is it a number? What is its value? So I'm just going to undo that. It's not going to complain anymore. And then we're just going to go ahead and run it to see that it works. Installing. Run it. Oh, that's why you run it. Obviously it's not going to work. All we did was get the weather, but we didn't do anything with it. We set all the values to be something, but that's all. So the last step of what we have to do is actually set up the UI value. So here we'll do another function, and we'll call it update UI for user interface, and let's say it'll accept a weather object, and then we'll say temperature label dot text equals weather dot. Actually, we don't actually have to pass anything in. Because we created this variable called weather above everything else outside of view did load, it's technically available inside of here, just like it's available inside of here. So that's not always a great thing to do. It's not exactly global, but it's kind of, it can be kind of weird sometimes. Now remember that we have to do this to put a double inside of a string. So I'll say weather dot Autocomplete temperature. Temperature is one of those weird words that when I say it too many times or see it too many times, I start saying it really weird. I don't know how to explain that, but weather dot. I'm waiting for the autocomplete, even though I know what it is. If you're wondering why summary doesn't have to go in this quotation with the parentheses, it's because if you type in weather and you see what it has as options, you can see that it has all the variables that we listed in weather .swift, and you can see that summary is the only one that's a string, so we can just directly set it as a text for the summary label. So what's next? Humid label text equals weather dot humidity. It's not gonna autocomplete because I didn't close the. There you go. That should be right. I remember this one time. Weather has no. What is it called? Oh, I definitely spelled that wrong. One thing I forgot to mention is that this weather, that time, this time variable, let's just run it and make sure it works. After we get the current weather, we'll do update UI. Problem with that is, let's try it and see if it works. I suspect that it might not. Click play. Values came back 0. If you notice the difference between the last time we ran it, last time it kept the standard labels, the default labels that we put, and this time it populated to, what was it, all zeros. The reason for that is not completely obvious, and this is the first issue that you're going to have with making network requests. This is kind of issue that you have in general with programming, but it's something that you're going to have to learn well. In Android, it's when I first learned it was a lot more complicated. In iOS, it's not as much, especially with Alamo Fire. I'll address it in the next video, but essentially what's happening is when I tell the app to go and get the current weather, this request happens and it's returned almost immediately, but not exactly immediately. And pretty much the app keeps moving along. It doesn't just wait for this information to get back. There's ways to make it wait for it to get back, but that's not something that you do. So when you load in your Facebook, your Instagram, all the individual posts are loading, but while they're loading, you can still browse through your feed or whatever is loaded. You can look at it. And one thing that you definitely don't want to do is bog down the UI in any way. It's always it's been taught to me as kind of like a highway where the things that have to be most responsive is like user interaction, like touches and taps of the screen, and then things like, so that would be like in the fast lane of a freeway, and then anything that's like on the internet request, the network request or whatever, that goes in one of the far right lanes, and essentially like you just like merge it in when you can, but it should never be in your way. All that slow stuff, all the thing that can be like indefinite, you have to keep off like the main road. The reason for that is that if somebody's on Wi-Fi, then yeah, their information to come back really quickly. If somebody has 1 bar of service on their cell phone, it's not going to. You can't make the same presumptions that you can do on a computer, on mobile devices, because their network connectivity is going to vary. So I'm going to end it on. I'm going to end the video on this note. I know it's kind of a weird place to stop, but it's kind of like a own topic of its own. So I want to get started on it in the next video. But what we did in this video, we looked at the API docs a little bit. We removed, what we did is called refactoring. We we moved the functionality that we wanted into a logical separate place. And then we just cleaned up the initial code with the update UI function, and now our view did load only has a couple lines in it that we wrote. So in the next one, we're going to get deeper into our current problem. We're going to get the app working like it should again. We'll probably download some icons and maybe look at the location stuff that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.